China, corruption, so much in the news. I mean, sometimes those things go together, sometimes they don't. Brian Lilly here with Sam Cooper, and Sam was away last week, but I reached out to you because there's a whole pile of different headlines going on, and I said, "Oh, we got to talk. We have to talk in a big way." We got Melanie Jolie musing about having Chinese Canadian co-production of electric vehicles. We'll build Chinese electric vehicles here. We've got the prime minister, of course, his joint statement with President Xi out of China said we'll have more media cooperation, and then just this weekend they jailed Jimmy Lai, the media magnate who dared criticize the government for 20 years. You tell me that there is a relationship between the potential fall of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister of Britain and China. And of course, we've got this corruption with organized crime, could be transnational organized crime, we don't know, and a lot of police officers in and around the Toronto area. Where do you want to start? I mean, it's nothing's been happening since the last time you and I chatted. Where do you want to start?
It's like the first time we talked this year, Venezuela was raided and it's just snowballed since then. But okay, let's start at a high level because all the themes interrelate, I do believe. But Melanie Jolie uh musing about Canada and China building EVs together. This is just the same old story of the Liberal Party of Canada elites turning a blind eye to Trojan horses for Chinese intelligence infiltration, stealing of Canada's world-leading technology, like the Nortel case. We've probably talked about how Nortel, the Chinese spies, I assert, stole our 5G technology. It went directly into Huawei. So Canada
There,
building,
there's no doubt about that. For
there's no
people that
doubt.
don't know, Nortel, Northern Telecom, our tech giant of 20 years ago, uh, when they shut down, the federal government took over their headquarters and they were going to put the Department of National Defense in there. The place was filled with so many bugs, sensors, cameras, they had to rip it down to stud. That's how much they were spying. I was an employee, this would have been 99 or 2000, of the city of Nepean, and they owned a theater that Nortel would rent out for some of their buildings next door. People were arrested at that theater during training sessions by the RCMP for espionage with stuff going back to China. So yeah, it's been going on a long time. And
For
now we're going to
decades.
partner with them on EVs, but now they have the technology. Like when they stole the solar panel technology in the McGuinty government era of let's cooperate with China, we had the technology. Now they have the EV technology though, don't they?
They have the technology. We're still good in our universities. They still want to suck our IP out. And I believe it'll become more and more clear. I know that reports are coming out of the US that document this, that China is set up in Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, where our industrial base and, our cyber, our comms technology is, so that they can move into the United States. Again, this will sound wild, but into 2 or 3 years, it'll be like Bible verse. But I think, Brian, the theme I would connect to all these breaking stories you point to, including Keir Starmer's government, is it doesn't make sense for Melanie Jolie and Mark Carney to be doing, EVs together with China because the U.S. government, not just Donald Trump, but across the aisle, they're not going to put up with that anymore. So it takes me to the
No,
high level. Why is Mark Carney moving ahead with these absurd deals? I know we're going to talk about media police. My theory is uh, Scott Bessent, the White House is saying, who's Carney working for? Look, he's trying to thread the needle between uh, his let's call them his patrons, the industrialists in Montreal that I've reported have been in bed with the Chinese Communist elite, along with Jean Chrétien for decades. He is working with and for them. He's working for a majority. His elbows up rhetoric is still winning, anti-US, anti-Donald Trump. They've got a ticket to be a majority government for a long time unless Canadians smarten up. And here's the key. He knows, that is Mark Carney, that if we don't get an American trade deal, China doesn't even care about us anymore because we matter because of our trade integration with the US and the world. So I think he's trying to hit three buttons. And that's why you saw him come scrambling back from Davos when he said he went a little bit too far in Davos, pissed off the wrong people, and then he went back on the phone call to the White House. I believe groveling. So let's see if he can hit all those three, and Canadians will remain in the dark long enough to allow him to do it. But that's what we're gonna. That's what how I see the world in Canada right now.
Well, so I'm writing up on a report that first came from the Globe and Mail today about Doug Ford and Mark Carney looking to or talking about the possibility of a spring election. Now, the idea that Carney wants a spring election is no surprise. I mean, that's been going on for a while now. They've been making noises. They've been sending signals, setting the table that they want to have a spring election or at least the option to have one. So I think the speech in Davos was poking Trump in the eye to make him angry so that he would turn around and make the noises that he did, which would send Mark Carney's poll numbers up as Canadians rallied behind the leader. Then he rolls out that GST expansion program, which is, giving people more money to vote for him, especially the next payment goes out April 2nd, and the one after that, that's going to be a double payment, goes out July 3rd. Imagine an election in between that, Sam, where you're told, hey, vote for me and you'll get double money. Well, at least if you're getting GST rebates. And if you're getting GST rebates, you're either really young, like I used to get them when I was at high school, college age, or you're not doing well financially and you don't want them anymore because you want to be making more money. Uh, it's one of those two things, but those people will still vote. Good number of them will, and they'll vote for the Liberals. So they're setting up all these things. They're calling the Conservatives obstructionist to set the stage for an early election so that if talks with the U.S. go south, he's already got a majority government or potentially has a majority government so that he doesn't have to negotiate with the pesky opposition anymore and so that he can move forward with deals like he's doing with China. So that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, that's what he's got a perfect ramp to hit that to thread that needle. But the needle that he won't thread with that rhetoric now is getting a very good trade deal because it looks like we're falling behind Mexico if we believe, Jamil Javani, who is close with JD Vance. So I agree with you totally. I
And I've
don't
been
see.
speaking with business folks who say we're falling behind
Yeah.
Mexico as well.
So how
And they
will it
do.
help us if we're saying that Mark Carney wants to invite Chinese state journalists into our country? He wants to cooperate with the Chinese police. You mentioned organized crime and Chinese police. This is my specialty. Organized crime and Chinese police are working in Canadian cities to target our citizens. And, can I read you a quote from one? I want to back that up because that's kind of a powerful statement, but
Okay,
I
sure.
yeah, I reported on the NSI Cup 2019 foreign interference report that was leaked.
Yes,
I
I saw
happened
that.
to get it exclusively, so I wrote recently. I went back to that document. Here's a quote from the report. PRC officials have used covert and unauthorized tactics, including unauthorized trips to Canada, threats, intimidation, harassment, arresting relatives in China as a form of leverage, paying Chinese language journalists to locate and track individuals, and discouraging people from reporting their covert activities to Canadian police. End quote. I could unpack that in a new whole book, Brian. It points to everything that happened in our last election to Joe Tay, paying off Chinese journalists to track people inside Canada. And Mark Carney he's doubling down. And I say that's reckless endangerment.
Yeah, let's bring some focus to this. But on that point about media, Jimmy Lai is a guy who owned a newspaper called Apple Daily, very popular, but it was a bit of a dissident paper. It wasn't sanctioned by the government. It supported dissenters in Hong Kong. He was arrested. A bunch of the journalists were arrested. And now he's been sentenced to 20 years in jail. The other journalists, I think it's 6.5 to 10 years that they're getting. Why do we want to do media cooperation between Canada and China when that's happening? Terry Glavin at National Post had a great piece on this recently. The whole China deal that Carney went to do, the strategic partnership, I think that most Canadians just believe that this is giving us an alternative to trade with the US. They don't realize the attempt at deeper integration with China. They don't realize that this continues the currency swaps that allow Canadian and Chinese businesses to settle accounts in local currencies. Now, why does that matter? Because generally speaking, international deals are settled in US dollars. So you buy something in Canada, you do a big purchase out of Germany. Guess what? It's settled in US dollars so that we all have an international global standard of what the currency is. And it's been that way for a long time. China wants to break that. So the deal that allows Canada and China to do up to 30 billion, I think it is, in a year in local currency swaps and not use US dollars, that was actually started by Harper. Bad idea back then. But continuing it on now when the US is trying to clamp down on this is a bad idea. I looked at all the other countries that have this, Sam. Not one of them is a peer country. They're all second and third tier countries. The closest would be Argentina, and that was signed by the socialist government that was there before that wanted them to become very close to China, not Javier Milei. So, all these deeper integration ties are the problem, not China selling us plastic bowls and us selling them canola.
I totally agree. I mean, both Canada and the United Kingdom seem to be at the lead of the former leading Western democracies that are getting deeper into that integration financially, in technology, in what they call people to people exchanges. And
Hmm.
it's all consistent with Beijing's global plan to displant the United States as sort of the global leader or hegemon. And so Canada, the currency swap deals, I know, when people like you and me get into the weeds financially, people may start to flick the channel, but it's huge. This is what Mark Carney was advocating back when he, stepped into the Bank of England. This was a trademark policy of getting those yuan United Kingdom central bank swaps going. And, when
But
we
the
look,
UK never got them. The UK did not go forward with it.
they didn't go forward with them then, but I think the story in the UK now is about Keir Starmer's government and people like the disgraced Lord Mandelson. There's enough open source records that have come out now in the Epstein files, and I'm not getting off topic. This isn't even about the egregious abuse of children. This is about people in Keir Starmer's government and Western governments getting into deals with Chinese state-owned corporations and not telling the people of the countries, that they're leaders of. So the people of the United Kingdom didn't know that the UK, with the Starmer government, was getting deeper into trade dealings with Beijing. I
So,
see a
so
total
Keir,
mirror in Canada.
okay, let's start with defining the mirror. So Keir Starmer, president of the United Kingdom, there's been speculation he could resign anytime. Maybe by the time this comes out, he will have. Probably not. We're recording as it heads late into the evening. What is the scandal rocking his government? Who is Peter Mandelson? And then we'll talk about how you see this relating to Mark Carney and Canada and the industrial complex out of Montreal.
Right. So let's start with Lord Mandelson. This is one of the global elites that's come up looking very bad in the Epstein files, including, to be graphic, a picture of him in his underwear in Mandelson apartment with, a woman with her face redacted out. So he is deep into the kind of the icky dealings with Epstein, but he was appointed as ambassador to the United States by Keir Starmer when Keir Starmer came in as prime minister in 2024. Why does that matter? Because Keir Starmer and his government knew that Peter Mandelson had secret dealings with Russian elites, Chinese elites, Free Epstein. And those dealings are of the type, where a key, former Labor politician, Peter Mandelson, steps down and then he starts something called the Global Council. It's one of these lobbying transnational business firms. And what he does is he goes over to Beijing and he scores deals for these Chinese state controlled entities to invest in the United Kingdom. So he's getting huge percentages on his dealings with China, on his dealings with Russia. And as people like you and I think know, those dealings include how those foreign intelligence services use those investments to get into our societies and start to influence policy. And so I'll end here. I mean, Keir Starmer very clearly knew that Lord Mandelson, when Keir Starmer appointed him as the ambassador to Washington, was compromised by Jeffrey Epstein. But further than that, I say, and I've found the evidence, was involved in unreported business dealings with the elite of Chinese communist global business entities, right? So I draw a through line beyond that and say when Keir Starmer's government recently canceled the biggest Westminster spy scandal in decades about how China's secret police were gathering intelligence on UK conservative politicians who were critical of Beijing. Stop me if that starts to sound familiar with
Yeah.
Canada's election interference story. Here's the key, Brian. Keir Starmer's government killed that case. It has just approved a mega embassy that Washington says will be like a Chinese spy station. And I say it's people like Mandelson that were influential. The signs are all there. So that's the UK scandal. And I say the people surrounding Mark Carney, I'm not going to say they're in the Epstein files for those icky reasons. What I'm going to say is they're in the same Chinese influence network files. And I think I do believe that's influential to Mark Carney's government direction now.
Yeah, I'll say this about Carney and the Epstein files. His name shows up 69 times. I believe 68 of them are showing up in financial newsletters that Epstein subscribed to.
Yep.
And so while he was Bank of Canada, Bank of England governor, he's showing up in financial news reports. One of them was when Carney was Bank of England governor, was giving a speech to a financial group in New York. And there was hey, should we go to this? So and so has a table. That's all that we found. Um,
I found
but
one more.
you found one more? Okay, tell me about it.
So it's one of these complaints that could be from uh, a crazy person or there could be something to it. But someone says Mark Carney is involved in the investigation of JP Morgan banker Jess Staley. Now, Jess Staley is the person, together with Peter Mandelson, that's very involved in getting Western banking networks embedded in Beijing. So I thought, if there's any one file on Carney that could be a little damaging, maybe it's that. But I don't
But
know. I don't
but
know.
but we don't have anything connecting Carney to Epstein in the
No,
icky
no,
way.
no.
But there are those photos, and I was the only one in the mainstream media report on them of him and his wife hanging out with Ghislaine Maxwell at an event hosted by Carney's sister-in-law, his wife Diane's sister. Uh, can you imagine a conservative politician showing up 69 times in the Epstein files and those photos happening, and nobody in the gallery that covers Parliament Hill, um, ever asking them about it? Because
I
they've never asked.
I totally agree, Brian. And the thing is, like, when we get to a senior level in Canadian journalism and we can see these things, we can report sensitively and we can put the caveat. A picture of Carney with Ghislaine Maxwell doesn't prove anything, but it shows a little bit of a what the investigative people would call an affinity. Their networks are comfortable around each other. The same thing with this complaint saying, basically, it said Mark Carney is involved in whether he's investigating diligently or not. This JP Morgan banker, Jess Staley. Again, I don't know if there's anything there, but I think there's enough to start to ask some questions,
But,
right? That's all
I
I'm
mean,
saying.
the reason that I reported on the photos of Carney and his wife at this event, I forget what they called it. It's like it was basically Britain's elite out in the summer of, I think, 2014. It's in my report on it. The reason I reported on it and asked Carney's campaign, he was still running for Liberal leader at the time. The reason I reported on it and asked for comment, which they gave to me, and with an explanation saying, you know, they'd met at a couple of social events because of the connection between Maxwell and Diane Fox Carney's sister, who were friends, but knew nothing of Maxwell or of Epstein or anything of that. The reason I reported on that was that there was an online whisper campaign that some liberals believe was started by liberals opposed to Carney becoming leader. They were sharing it online and saying, look at this is dirty. So, if there's a whisper campaign, you should at least be able to defend yourself. But my point on the media is whether it's China or these photos or the 16, there's just not a curiosity there. There's not a curiosity about what comes next. I've had some of my colleagues here at Queen's Park laugh and ask questions that are essentially mocking Premier Doug Ford when he has said Chinese EVs will be spy cars. It's like, have you heard of the Google? You go on Google and ask about that. There are reports. There's also the fact that the British Ministry of Defense and British defense contractors don't allow the vehicles on their premises. And if you're an employee and you've got one, you've got to park 2 miles away. The
Yeah,
Israelis have stopped using them because they were giving them out to their officers, and that data was being transmitted back to China on where Israeli senior military officers in the Israeli defense forces were located, where they lived, where they drove. You know, these are real things, but there's a lack of curiosity in our media.
there's a lack of curiosity and professional pride because, when you're in what we call the bubble, whether it's Ottawa or Queen's Park, Toronto, you could be very, very influenced by political chiefs of staff or PR departments that give you access to the leader so you can do, nice insider stories if you play nice. And I'm looking at it very cynically because you're right. Any person that can, search on a computer or even, follow social media in Canada can find Canadian experts saying there are deeply, understood concerns with Chinese electric vehicles. You don't have to spend a day diving into that. So for a reporter that mocks, or says Doug Ford could not provide any evidence, I'm sorry, but those types of reporters, I mean, if you're out there in Canadian viewer and listener land, you should discount them because they're showing their ignorance and their incuriosity, which is a bad look for a journalist.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I was in the middle of building a report on the spy capabilities of these cars. By the way, um, North American made EVs, and soon the non EVs will also be essentially rolling spy factories. I was driving around in a Ford Expedition for a couple of days when I was down in Florida. Those things have cameras everywhere. You put on your turn signal, and suddenly there's on your screen up pops uh, on the brand new Ford Expedition, up pops a little camera showing you what's behind there. Well, these vehicles are recording all of this, and if you program correctly, they record it all, they save it all, they transmit it all. And so, these are very valid concerns about the China deal. Now that you've had time to digest Carney's China deal that came out at the end of January, what jumps out at you? I spent part of last week before I left for the Sunshine State talking to Sandra Watson Parcells, academic at King's College London, doing her PhD on this. She's with the Department of Defense area over at King's College, a Canadian who's lived in China. And she said that there's a lot of concerns about everything outside of transactional trade. That's in the latest Full Comment podcast. What jumps out at you with this joint statement between Carney and Xi?
Yeah, it's what's in there that doesn't need to be in there. So I think everyone that gets global trade understands that, even Washington, while it's trying to play tough, very clearly they care about having a trade deal with China.
They want
You
to sell
can't.
soybeans.
What's that?
They want to sell soybeans.
Yeah, they just like Scott Moe and the companies like Richardson's in Saskatchewan that provide so many jobs want to sell canola. But as others have said, China will try to exert such leverage in trade that it wants Saskatchewan to sell all its canola to China, or a big deal, a big lot of it. So what happens if this potential global conflict we've been talking about surrounding Taiwan or Japan and China kicks off, and Canada is selling most of it, a lot of its oil or canola to China? They have huge leverage over us. So it's just that's why I say it's a dangerous thing that needs to be managed, but more focused. Look, the police cooperation deal.
Yeah.
Mark Carney agreeing to Beijing to have greater information sharing and collaboration between China's police and the RCMP. Brian, it's already been reflected in the Hogue Commission or my reporting based on classified documents that Justin Trudeau's administration was warned by CSIS. I just read you the quote. China is sending in its operatives into our cities to target our citizens. And as I say, they're doing it a lot of the times through diaspora community leaders who are very involved in organized crime. So China works hand in hand around the world with organized crime. There's a number, it's not just me reporting this, a number of media sources such as ProPublica, the Safeguard Defenders Report. New reports are going to be coming out of Washington showing this nexus. And so for Carney to say, okay, China, you have greater police information access in Canada. That's a huge sellout to not only our diaspora citizens who already know the terror that that will bring, but everyone, you and I, journalists, people that are a little bit skeptical of China, could be, could face greater danger. So that police cooperation is probably the worst part of the deal. And it goes hand in hand, I say, with the greater media access. Again, what's my evidence? The Joe Tay story. It's now on the record in Parliament that he says he was warned by the RCMP that he was in danger during the campaign. He had to hire private security. Mark Carney says he wasn't even briefed on these concerns, which I can't believe. But the whole campaign against Joe Tay was rolled out through a Liberal politician, Chinese media in Toronto, and high-level Chinese propaganda that swept into Canada attacking Joe Tay. So that
Joe
just
Tay
shows
being the Conservative candidate, and I believe Don Valley North, which incidentally is the riding Michael Ma wanted to run in.
the Bazinga, as I say, is yeah, the Don Valley North, which is a very famous riding in Canada for foreign interference. Don't need to go through all the names that have ever come up there, but this is a riding that China wants to control. Others like Richmond outside of Vancouver, Scarborough. Joe Tay and his campaign staff were followed in threatening ways. This is the evidence. He feared for his personal safety, and that campaign was leveraged through Chinese media and I believe China's United Front networks, which involve Chinese police and Chinese gangsters on our soil. So Mark Carney has opened the door wider, and this is why I say, look, if I was a Chinese father of a family that becomes more endangered, Brian, I'm sorry to say it, the evidence is there that Mark Carney has been warned. He knows if someone gets hurt, he's on the hook for it. I would sue him.
The since I mentioned his name, Michael Ma, I'll fill you in on something that I learned at the conservative convention. Um, so I know a lot of people had raised the issue of is Michael Ma moving over due to Chinese foreign interference? He was uh oh he was one Markham riding. Tim Hodgson was another. I think Hodgson's Markham Unionville, and I'm forgetting the full name of Ma's off the top of my head.
Markham Unionville and Markham Thornhill are the two ones there.
So which one is Thornhill?
Hodgson is Thornhill because he took
Okay.
over for Mary Ing, who I said was one of the 11, although
Yep.
unwitting. Markham Unionville, Ma replaces. This is where Joe Tay wanted to run. Michael Ma beats Paul Chiang, the guy that threatened or, indirectly
Who said
mentioned.
go arrest him and
Yeah,
collect the bounty?
yeah.
So, lots of people were speculating, "Oh, is there Chinese foreign interference?" And I had reported that, uh, Tim Hodgson
Hmm.
was the key to, um, bringing Ma into the Liberal fold. And I had people trying to tell me, "Oh, they'd worked together. They were very close," and I couldn't confirm that they worked together. I looked all over, but I knew and was confident, yes, it was Tim Hodgson, that they had neighboring ridings and they would go to events together. And Hodgson was constantly saying, "Hey, Michael, we got a nicer pool. It's warmer over here. Come jump in." And that's how they recruited him. And I ran into someone who knows the situation intimately, having worked with Ma, danced with him up until the night of December 11th, when the conservative Christmas party was.
The conga line.
Yeah. And he said, "You were bang on. It was Tim Hodgson." He said, "But it goes deeper." And then tells me that Michael Mann and Tim Hodgson have been friends for close to 20 years. They're both members of the exclusive Granite Club in North Toronto, which you have to be quite wealthy to be a member of the Granite Club. I'm not a member. I've been there because I have friends who are members, but they they've been going to each other's birthday parties. Their wives are friends. That's what this came down to.
Fair enough. I'll buy what you're selling there, and I'll also say that Tim Hodgson, his riding was one of the 11 that
Yeah.
By
Oh,
spy sources flagged in 2019 as being subject to foreign interference. And yeah, he's obviously a very, very smart, charming guy. So I'm sure there are a number of factors working there.
I was just shocked with, as I said, when I found out they've been going to each other's birthday parties for years, and they hang out at the Granite Club together. How did the Conservative Party not flag this? Although Ma had been involved, by the way, in Conservative Party circles for a long time. He ran for the Conservatives in 2019 and lost under Andrew Scheer, didn't run in 21 under O'Toole, and then came back for 25 with Polyev.
2019, Michael Ma ran in Don Valley North unsuccessfully. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
Or
So
or or was it a Scarborough riding?
I someone it's triggering me that someone had mentioned it was Don Valley North.
Yeah, it
So
might have
if
been Don Valley North where Joe Tay eventually ran.
right.
We'd
So
have to get on the Google here and look
no,
this
I
up.
mean people listening to us are going to want a network map. But Brian, I've told a few other people, including Ezra at Rebel News, interviewed me, and I said people can go to the bureau and they're going to find my reporting, which even shows a screen picture of a CSIS 2019 report that says in 2019, when Man Wanzhou was arrested, China's Ministry of State Security was tasked from the highest levels in Beijing to impact Canada so deeply that Man Wanzhou would be released and not go down to the States. They wanted to secure an impact. And so they were going to, this is the key, they were going to calibrate, that's a quote, their support for Justin Trudeau and support not just the Liberal Party. This is what the document says. They were going to start to support some Liberal and some NDP and some conservative candidates in key ridings in 2019. So that makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if 2019, that very key Don Valley North riding, whether
Now,
Michael Mock could have been
you're gonna
a
kick yourself
conservative.
when I tell you. You're gonna kick yourself when I tell you who won in, 2019 in Don Valley North. It was Han Dong. Enough
Oh,
said there.
you said that,
2019,
not me.
he ran next, door in Don Valley East. For those of you not in Toronto, there's a lot of ridings with the same names all next Don Valley East, Don Valley West, Don Valley North, and, like, 4 Scarboroughs, it gets confusing. So, he was in the neighboring one and lost to, Yasmin, Ratanzi. But Han Don won, Don Valley North. We both should have known that from all the talking we did about him over the years.
Yes. We know that we know that Paul Chien took away Bob Soroya's seat in the Markham Unionville riding, and I've reported things sourced from Aaron O'Toole in 2021 that the Conservatives had the perception and the intelligence reporting that they felt that Bob Soroya was chased around his riding in threatening ways by Chinese agents. And recall, this is the same story that Joe Tay has now sort of affirmed in another nearby riding in 2025. So we've dropped a lot of names and a lot of neighborhoods out there, and people will get confused. But I think the headline here is China continues to interfere in Toronto, and it supports candidates across parties.
Let's switch to the cops because you've written about problems with Canadian law enforcement in the past, specifically the RCMP. Now we've got this big bust last week. Um, More than 30 people arrested. I think it started out with 9 Toronto police officers, including one, I believe, charged with conspiracy to murder or attempted murder. There was a plot to kill a corrections official who was stopping contraband from going in. This cannot be the end of the story here. And and when they say that they were involved with organized crime, I want to know what kind of organized crime. Are they dealing with bikers? I was in Montreal when the Hells Angels were really big, and they didn't corrupt the cops that we found out anyway, not on a large scale. But they went to the Quebec equivalent of the Ministry of Transportation, where you get your license. And they planted their own people inside so they could find out where you live, what your license plate was, get all this information on you, and then go target you. Uh, but I've never seen a police corruption bust like this in Canada.
Yeah, I think I can say with pretty good confidence that the networks in Toronto involved here will consist in part of the bikers. So when we say the bikers, it could be, a 6'4" Ryan Wedding type that looks very intimidating, very powerful guy. But that guy, that biker, whether from Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia, or Alberta, or elsewhere, will be very well connected in the Yucatan Peninsula. Because if there's this case, as you know, included cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, and marijuana. All of those, to me, and my case reporting are consistent. If it's cocaine, it's from Latin America and Mexico. That's the Ryan Wedding story. Remember, the Ryan Wedding story we talked about in the early new year is about, a Toronto lawyer was involved in, see if this rings a bell, a conspiracy to kill a U.S. government federal witness. This Toronto lawyer accessed
Well, that's that
information
the
on
allegation.
OPP.
Let's be careful.
That's the allegation.
The
The
allegation
allegation.
in the indictment is that he, um, advised on killing a witness, an informer.
And not only that, the indictment says he accessed information on the killing of an innocent family of South Asian migrants and students in Caledon. So this lawyer that's accused of these alleged crimes had access to Ontario police files. He was involved allegedly in counseling murder of a US government witness. The drugs involved, the methods of cocaine coming up from Mexico into Canada.
So do you
All of
think that will uncover a connection?
I it from my knowledge, which includes high-level US government sources, any cocaine coming into Canada in the past few years, Ryan Wedding at some level was connected because he became the single Canadian trusted by Mexican cartels to to bring cocaine and methamphetamine up into Canada. And I say the same networks involved in the fentanyl labs, working with the Mexican cartels and the Chinese Communist Party, sending fentanyl around the world, not just devastating our cities. So again, when you look at the pattern of a high-level Ontario justice official or enforcement official blocking drugs coming into a facility, which is a big profit line for gangs, you look at the level of brazenness to try to kill a Canadian official. This to me speaks to Mexican cartel activity.
It's gonna be fascinating to watch that, and I can't believe that we wouldn't have more. If this was an American bust, we would know all kinds of details by now. And unfortunately, in Canada, the line is always it's an ongoing investigation. To a degree, I understand that. But by the time you've busted more than 30 people, you should be able to offer some level of detail.
Yeah, I agree with you halfway, and at the same time, I think they laid out their case pretty well with video at the press conference showing these thugs, including underage gunmen, which is another sign, I believe, of the cartels in Toronto, trying to kill this Canadian enforcement official. Other things they laid out in the charges that there were some officers giving protection to illegal marijuana grows or dispensaries. That's direct drug involvement for Canadian police officers. There were some that were literally selling fentanyl, heroin, oxycodone. There were some that were involved in cocaine. And Brian, I think just because of my reporting of the past few years, I think this goes to multiple departments across Canada in the way that I know very well that organized criminals have people in Canadian police that can access police databases and files. That's the whole story of the Cameron Ortis intelligence mole, convicted, spy for Mexican cartels, Iranian Hezbollah networks, and it looks like the CCP. So I say it goes,
So, hold on.
yeah.
Remind folks of who he is.
So Cameron Ortis, another stunning police corruption case, came out in 2019. It went through court. The allegations were that he, as the top RCMP Canadian intelligence official. He had access to the crown jewels of Western intelligence, CIA, NSA, Australian intelligence, UK, and he got as such, he knew that the American government was so concerned about how Mexican cartels and Hezbollah were set up in Canadian cities, Toronto and Vancouver. They had technology, encryption operations. They were running, as I reported, billions through Canadian banks. This is all proven fact. Ortis leaked the American government, plans to cooperate with Canadian police and crack down on these Mexican cartel and Hezbollah global money launderers. That's the whole story. And I'll end here. Ortis, I sat down for that trial. I was there every day. And he said of course, he wasn't admitting that he was the only guy, but he said, it's well known within the RCMP that these crime groups had exquisite visibility on the Toronto Police Services, radio room and other departments. He said that. And as I say,
Wow.
Canada did nothing in the interim. Again, I felt like someone in the wilderness sort of screaming to the Canadian public, there's more to this case. And that's why I say, look, starting to come out
And
in the
he was
Toronto.
convicted in the end, right?
He was convicted and he's appealing, of course. But my understanding was America and the United Kingdom wants to go at him if his case doesn't stand up in Canada because they believe his case is so bad.
So, the charges against and claims against these Toronto police officers and others also included auto theft. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, oh, okay, so they're also involved with Hezbollah because that was
Exactly.
the money line for Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Steal cars in Canada, smuggle them out to Africa and the Middle East, sell them, launder money, buy weapons.
I agree. That is great pattern recognition, and the tow truck angle, I believe, is part of it because organized crime. I learned this out in British Columbia first. There's so many fake crashes going on and insurance scams. Those tow truck contracts to go there and tow a crashed vehicle are very lucrative. So it looks to me like the cartels, the Hezbollah networks, and of course, China's going to be in there somewhere, are trying to now control various pieces of industry and the tow truck, being a very notoriously saturated with crime.
Sam, there's much more that we could unpack, but you have to run and I have to get back to writing. So we'll talk again soon. Everyone, leave your comments below. Subscribe to both of our Substacks, and we'll talk again soon.
We will. Thanks, Brian.